Thank you, Pastor JR, for that introduction. Before I even get started with what I got written down here, that last song is such a great reminder, as we're up here speaking to you, how little of this we can boast about. And I hope you see that through our message today, but we're not here because we're anything great. We're here because God's allowed us to be here. And that song just really hits that home a little bit, that it's not anything that we're doing that brings us here today. Pastor JR gave us a great introduction, but I want to introduce you to our boys real quick. If you weren't here with us on Friday, I'm going to make them stand up and embarrass them a little bit. Simon and Jude, there they are in Senegal in our beautiful Christmas clothing. We're happy and honored to be here today with you. It's great to be back somewhere where we recognize some faces. We've been on tour all year since we've been back and visiting different churches, and it's fun to meet some people, or re-meet some people, I guess. We are serving with a team we call Desert Springs, and we are located in northern Senegal. There's a map of West Africa and an arrow pointing to Senegal. We're working towards opening a vocational school for young men, where we hope one day in the next year or so we'll be opening that school, and I'll be the first of two teachers. The other teacher, his family is from Appleton. So we're really representing Wisconsin here there in Senegal. We were sent from Plymouth Alliance Church near Sheboygan, and this year we're spending our year in Wausau, as it created a convenient location for us to do our tour from. I want to talk today about unfinished. That's the Alliance theme this year. And our text is going to come from Acts chapters 14 and 15. At the end of chapter 14, we find Paul and Barnabas returning to the church that sent them after their first missionary journey.
To the grace of God for the work that had now been completed. On arriving there, they gathered the church together and reported all that God had done through them and how he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles, and they stayed there a long time with the disciples.
So we see these sent ones coming back to the fellowship of the community of their church, and they're eager to report on what God was doing. What exactly was said wasn't recorded, but we can imagine that it's some of the events that we see in chapter 14. At the beginning of that chapter, we see Paul and Barnabas had been preaching the gospel to unbelieving Jews and Greeks, and people were coming to Christ. In Acts 14:1, it says,
At Iconium, Paul and Barnabas went as usual into the Jewish synagogue. There they spoke so effectively that a great number of Jews and Greeks believed.
You know, and when things are going really well in your Christian walk, often we get a little bit of a landslide and we see the other end of the spectrum. In Acts 14:2, we begin to read about it for Paul and Barnabas.
But the Jews who refused to believe stirred up the other Gentiles and poisoned their minds against the brothers. So Paul and Barnabas spent considerable time there speaking boldly for the Lord, who confirmed the message of his grace by enabling them to perform signs and wonders. The people of the city were divided. Some sided with the Jews, others with the apostles. There was a plot afoot among the Gentiles and Jews, together with their leaders, to mistreat them and stone them.
After moving to a new location, God moved in miraculous ways through Paul and Barnabas. In Acts 14, verse 8.
In Lystra, there sat a man who was lame. He had been that way from birth and had never walked. He listened to Paul as he was speaking. Paul looked directly at him, saw that he had faith to be healed, and called out, "Stand up on your feet." At that, the man jumped up and began to walk.
Then if you're following the cycle again, Paul and Barnabas faced considerable conflicts. Verse 19 and 20.
Then some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowd over. They stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city, thinking he was dead. But after the disciples gathered around him, he got up and went back into the city.
Much like Paul and Barnabas, we're back among our sending churches this year, you guys, the churches that enable us to go overseas. And we're reporting on our last couple of years overseas. And like them, we saw God moving in amazing ways. But we also saw strong opposition, and we expect to see that. And while we're back, we know that God's not finished with us. We know that he's started a work in us, and he's going to continue it, just like he did with Paul and Barnabas. So we want to invite you into our unfinished journey, even as we report to you on these past 2 years. I'm going to have Elizabeth give a summary on our last 2 years. I think it's important for you guys to hear our last 2 years on the field and understand where we're coming from.
We left the U.S. in August of 2018, and we went to France for French language study. We spent 11 months in a school that's dedicated to teaching missionaries who are serving all across French-speaking parts of the world. Our time there was spent in classroom instruction, lots of homework hours, and also time with language partners. We really had a great experience at that school, even though it was extremely difficult as adult learners learning another language. We were able to see some of Europe, and now we also have friends that are serving all over the world. In July of 2019, we moved to join our team in northern Senegal. We began learning our next language, for me, my third, and for Steve, his fourth language, the Wolof language. And 6 weeks after we came into the country, we actually were going on a prayer retreat with our entire team. We were spending time together, just getting to know one another and dedicating the coming year of ministry to the Lord and just see what He would have for us. On the way home from that retreat, our family made a stop at the capital city with 2 of our teammates, and the rest of our team went in one car, which is one family and 2 single individuals. They were on the way home from that retreat, and as their car crested a hill, they met a motorcyclist coming directly at them in their lane. There was no time for our teammates to respond, and they hit the motorcyclist head on. The man on the motorcycle was killed instantly. This event started a chain reaction for the members that were in the vehicle. They were experiencing extreme guilt and trauma from the events of that accident. Most of our team, half of our team, was dealing with that, while our family was looking for a new house to move into. It was an extremely hectic time, as you can imagine. Our team leader, who was the driver of the vehicle, was facing imprisonment by Senegalese law, though he was clearly not at fault in the accident, should have had to serve 2 months in jail minimum. While our team and our church were praying for him, we saw the community have all their eyes focused on what was happening with our team leader, and God saw fit to answer our prayers for him not to have to serve that jail time. And this was really a testimony of God's goodness to our team and allowing the team leader to go free and stay home. Around that same time, our family found a house to rent, and one day while Steve was cutting a large tile to use in our kitchen as a countertop, he had an accident, and his arm was sliced extremely severely on his right forearm. God saw fit to provide medical care in our community, which is not the best medical care, but Steve did not have any infection after that. And let me tell you, it was deep and it was nasty. And Steve has full function of his hand today. So we praise God for that. About a month after the car accident, we found that the 3 children who were in the car at the time of the accident were really recovering miraculously well. God protected their hearts and minds from the things that happened that day. However, several of the adults were not recovering as well, and one of our teammates, the boy's school teacher, needed to be evacuated to the U.S. to have better support and medical care from the result of that accident. In just a week's time from deciding that our teacher would be leaving, I asked my parents if they would be willing to come and teach school for our kids and our teammates' kids in the teacher's absence. And 1 week from asking them, they arrived at our house in Senegal, and they stayed for 6 weeks and were able to teach our kids, which was a huge blessing to all of us. We needed stability in that time. That took us up right to Christmas of 2019. My parents left, and we felt like we were going to have a little bit of a break and just recover as a team from some of the things that had happened. But then our teammate's son started to have neurological episodes, and he and his mother needed to be evacuated from the country. They were gone for 2 months. At the beginning of March, all of our teammates came back. Our teacher, our teammate, and her son. We were all together again, and we were really looking forward, finally, to having some peace on our team. But if you all remember, back to March of 2020, anything but peace was coming. We began to see the world respond to COVID-19. And Senegal, once they had the first case in country, responded very quickly and shut everything down. They restricted travel between regions, which meant we couldn't travel between what we might call counties in Wisconsin. You couldn't go outside of your county. They closed the airport, they instituted a nighttime curfew, and then they limited the number of people that were allowed in a vehicle together. So our family of 4 could only ride together, only 3 of us at a time. No one knew how long these restrictions would last or if any exceptions would be made in case of emergencies or other reasons. And then the U.S. Embassy announced that they were evacuating the country and they would be offering space on repatriation flights for U.S. citizens. Anyone who would possibly be interested in one of those flights was encouraged to sign up with the government. Not knowing when the flights would be or what the country would look like when those flights would be offered, we decided to go ahead and sign up just for more information. Then in mid-April, the embassy contacted us and said that there was a new flight and we had seats on it if we wanted it. Well, we weren't really sure if we wanted it. We were staying at home, probably like most of you at that time, but we didn't really feel any imminent danger, but we really just didn't know, what are we supposed to do here? So we talked to the embassy for more information and asked them if they would be able to get us authorization to even travel to the airport. And they said, no, you'd have to get that approval from the Minister of the Interior, kind of like the Vice President of Senegal. And that certainly seemed like a long shot. And so then the following day, the U.S. Embassy asked us, well, are you going to take this flight or not? And we said, well, we don't have this letter from the embassy, and we're not sure about how to travel with all of us in our car. And, we have a nighttime curfew. The flight was supposed to leave at 8 a.m. and we're 4 hours from the airport. The curfew didn't lift until 6 a.m. There's just no way that we can do any of that, even if we wanted to. So the embassy worker said to Steve on the phone then, he said, well, let me see what I can do. And we thought, okay, go ahead, see what you can do. Then at 8 p.m., so this is the night before the flight, the U.S. Embassy agent called us and also sent an email, and we found a letter from the Minister of the Interior with all 4 of our names on it, along with 4 tickets to be able to return to the U.S. And we said, well, what do we do with this? God is clearly opening some doors. And then the agent said to Steve, he said, and by the way, we can hold the plane for you if you want to come. Hold the airplane just for our family. So we started talking to Alliance regional directors and our team, and they said, we're not entirely sure why, but God is definitely opening the door. We think that you should go through it. So we did. We packed up our house. We stayed up till about 2 a.m., packed everything up, got things in order as best we could. And as soon as the curfew lifted at 6 a.m., we were on the road. We arrived at the airport about 10, and they said, you must be the Williams family. Welcome aboard. Just 24 hours from the time when we got the news that we were leaving, we found ourselves at Steve's parents' house in South Carolina. We were back, but the world did not look like the world we had left. Things were closed down. People were in a very different state emotionally, and we were extremely confused. We felt like we were in a fog for a number of weeks, even months. Just, God, why did you bring us back? Surely this can't be the plan for us, just to sit here in lockdown? What are you doing? And I have to admit that I was angry. I was just frustrated in my soul. What is going on? Why are we here? Then the Alliance director of our area said, instead of trying to figure out when you would go back to Senegal, would you just consider staying in the U.S. this year as a year of early home assignment? We were scheduled to come home this June instead of last year. And that was a hard thought. We thought maybe we'd be back in the U.S. for a month or two, not an entire year. But we really spent several weeks in prayer and counsel and determined that is what God was saying for us to do, is to stay. But it wasn't a clear sign. It was just God was saying it would be better for you to stay than go back. And that isn't what I wanted. I wanted, stay firmly. Here's the reason, and just feel really solid in that. And that was frustrating for me too. Like God just didn't give me that clear sense of direction that I wanted. And then 1 week after making that decision, our oldest son woke up one morning in extreme pain. And we rushed him to the emergency room, and he underwent emergency surgery within an hour of us arriving there. And the doctor came out at one point and said to Steve and I, you guys are so lucky that you made it to the emergency room as quickly as you did. If you hadn't, the outcome for Simon could have been very different. We knew we weren't lucky. All of that anger, all of that frustration, the why, God, are we here? Why did you do that? It was answered in that moment. God had a plan for us that was bigger, that was different than what we thought, than what we wanted at that time, but he confirmed it in a way that was undeniable. And he showed us that he has a job for us here this year, an unfinished story for us to complete while we're here, even though it's not what we wanted or what we expected.
As Elizabeth just shared, it causes us to reflect on this past year. And we're really thankful for the report in Acts 14, these highs and lows, these details of what Paul and Barnabas were going through. We know that the enemy meant the division and the stoning of Paul for evil, but we also know that their story wasn't finished. We got to see that they went on, and people came to Christ because of their story. God gave them the strength to carry on. In hard times, lame started to walk. In hard times, people came to Christ. And that is an encouragement for us in this season. God isn't finished with me. He's not finished with Elizabeth. He's not finished with our family. And he's certainly not finished with you. We invite him into our unfinished journeys. And I hope you're inviting him into yours. Because as you do that, he's going to begin to mold you to be more like his son. You're going to see more deeply through the eyes of Christ, and you're going to grow in knowledge and understanding of who God is, that he loves us, and he wants to see the world brought to him. We invite God into our unfinished stories, and at the same time, he's inviting us into the unfinished stories of the people around us, these communities near us, people whom we love, people in your life like coworkers, your children's school teachers, maybe a neighbor, people that God is calling you to interact with on a deeper level. These stories also can come from us, stories of people who you may never know. And we'd like to introduce you to some people so that you can better connect with what God is doing throughout the world. In Acts 15, the Phoenician and Samaritan churches were also on Paul and Barnabas' speaking tour. Their reactions explain why we are here to report these unfinished stories.
Acts 15:3 says, "The church sent them on their way, and as they traveled through Phoenicia and Samaria, they told how the Gentiles had been converted. This news made all of the believers very glad."
Did you hear that? This news made the believers very glad. The sacrifices of those who are sent and those who are sending, you guys, are worth it. We hope the stories that we share will bring joy to your heart. We hope that you will praise God with us for the work that he has begun. First, I want to introduce you to a man. We're going to call him Mamadou. He is basically our landlord. To give you a little bit of cultural background first, in Senegal, relationships are key. If you were here on Friday, you heard us tell a little bit about some of the ministries we're involved in and how important relationships are. In Senegal, if you show up to somebody's house uninvited, you are invited in unconditionally, and you are expected to spend anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours there, spending time with this person who you've come to visit. And if you come around mealtime, you'll be expected to share in a meal with them. Even if they don't have enough to share, there is always enough to share. They will go hungry to make sure they can feed their guests. If you're not at mealtime, you come for tea, and this man here is pouring a drink that we call the taya. It is a very sweet drink, and it's a neat story because the tea leaves are brewed 3 times, and each time they get a little bit less bitter, and towards the end, it's this sugary, sweet tea that is very drinkable. And it's a metaphor for the relationships in Senegal. They say in Senegal, it takes about 45 minutes to drink this tea from the first brewing to the last. And it takes that long for friendship to develop. And the longer you spend on a friendship, the deeper it gets and the sweeter it gets and the easier it is to spend time. So this landlord of mine, Mamadou, he wants to get to know this stranger that's living in his neighborhood. He's fascinated by us. And we've had several opportunities to have conversations with him. Unfortunately, Mamadou is missing most of his teeth. And his French is terrible. His Wolof is nearly unintelligible. Even our team leader, who's been in the country for 15 years, says that Mamadou guy, he's hard to understand. And Mamadou's invited me over to his house anytime I want to come over, and we'll talk in Wolof so that I can learn the language. It's really hard to tell him that I can't, because I can't understand him. But I've come over a couple of times for conversations. One of the first meetings we had with Mamadou, I sat down with one of his wives. It's a polygamous society in Senegal, and his daughter, and we shared a meal together. And after some time, the conversation moved towards polygamy, and Mamadou wanted me to support his views of polygamy in front of his wife there. And as we got talking, I had to flat out say, I'm sorry, I believe in a one wife, one husband structure. His wife got very animated. She's like, Mamadou, you need to listen to this foreigner guy. He knows what he's talking about. Well, Mamadou quickly put an end to that conversation. It wasn't going the way he envisioned. But we've been able to have some conversations since then, not necessarily about polygamy, but other conversations. They haven't gone very deep. But later last year, our team leader calls us up and says, I've got great news. You need to hear this story. I had to go over and talk to your guard. We have a guard that protects our house at night. And I had to go talk to him, and we decided while we were there talking that we needed to go talk to Mamadou. So we walked over to his house about 3 blocks away, about 10 o'clock at night. And of course, as I just explained to you, you realize that even at 10 o'clock at night showing up, there's an expectation that you're going to stay and visit for a while. So they started some conversations, and after a little while, Mamadou started to share some concerns he had about what his religious teacher, his Muslim teacher, was telling him. He was saying, my religious teacher says to do this, but then he doesn't do that. How does that work? And our team leader was able to explain to Mamadou. He says, Mamadou, let me tell you about Jesus Christ. What Jesus Christ says always lines up with what Jesus Christ does. He is not fallible like the men that you follow. This was a big deal. This was a big conversation for Mamadou to be having with somebody that our team has not known but for 12 months. In Senegal, people, especially men, don't open up about religious concerns like that this early in relationships. And one of the most interesting things about this, our guard, who's a devout Muslim young man, was forced to sit there and listen to this conversation of one of his elders having doubts about his religion, because it would have been very rude for a younger man to leave a conversation between elders. We don't know the rest of this story. We don't know what God has planned for Mamadou. This is an unfinished story. I'd love to be up here today telling you that those conversations have continued and Mamadou has shown more openness to the gospel story. But to be fair, it hasn't. But we know that God is still working in Mamadou's life, and we know that when we get back to Senegal, we're going to be able to continue this relationship, and God has plans for it.
I'd like to share with you a story from our young women's school. In Senegal, our church has a school for young women. It was started about 15 years ago. God gave our church a vision to reach the women in our city. Most girls drop out of school at about 4th grade. There's a number of reasons for that. The first is that nationwide in Senegal, students in about 4th grade have to take an exam, and if they don't pass it, they don't continue on in school. So many girls are not able to pass that exam. Also, they are needed at home. There's often not enough money for the students to go to school, and so girls will be the first to be kept home, and then their brothers would have a better opportunity at continuing on in school. And so our school, through the church, aims to help these girls get a better education through a 3-year program which focuses on sewing or culinary arts, and we have about 80 to 100 girls that go through this program each year. This program has been so effective and has such a good reputation that in the community has asked our church what they could do to help the young men in the community now. And that's what Steve was talking about earlier. He will be the first teacher at a mechanics school for young men. Recently at our girls' school, we've been performing entrance and exit interviews to find out how much information the incoming girls already know about the gospel, and then as well exit interviews at how much do they know when they leave. We're finding out now, after about 15 years of having our school, that many of the girls that are coming into the school for the first time already have some basic understanding of the gospel and who Jesus is. We believe that this is the case because there are so many graduates in our community that they're now telling sisters and relatives, friends, the stories that they've heard from school. So that's extremely encouraging for us to know that these stories are being shared. The next thing that we're finding is that in the exit interviews, 90% of our girls, of the third-year students, can clearly articulate the gospel message. Now, whether or not they believe it, that's something different, but they know the stories and they know the truth behind them. So as we start to develop the program for the boys' school, we can see that after just 15 years, many of the boys will already begin to know some of the stories and will be leaving with a concrete biblical foundation. At the beginning of our school year in 2019, we had a nonprofit, non-Christian organization come to our church, and they asked if they could find 20 girls from outlying communities to sponsor them to come into our city and attend our school. This is an answer to prayer in a way that no one on our team or in our church ever expected. We've been praying for ways to reach outlying villages for a number of years, but there just are not enough workers and there's not enough believers in our community to really send out any missionaries from the local believers. So this was a way that God provided for these girls to be brought in from the outlying communities into our school. And then, like I just said, after a 3-year program, we know that 90% of those 20 girls will clearly be able to articulate the gospel message. They'll go back to their own community and be able to tell these stories to their sisters, their family, friends. And in this way, we believe that the gospel message will go forward without an actual missionary presence in that village, which is so incredibly exciting for us.
Like Elizabeth said, we hope that once we get back to Senegal, we'll be opening a school for young men, and it'll have a very similar impact in our community. As I said earlier, God is not finished reaching the Wolof people. Acts 15:36 shows Paul wanting to revisit the communities in which he originally spoke. And in the same way, we want to get back to Senegal, and we want to see what God is doing, because we know even without us there, we are not necessary for God to continue working. God is still working in Senegal. We serve in northern Senegal. We serve to a group of people called the Wolof people. They make up about 40% of Senegal. As you can see there, it's 5.6 million people. They're an unreached, underreached people group. 1/100th of 1% of the Wolof people call themselves Christian. That's 0.01%. That number is so hard for me to understand. That chart there, it's a little bit pixelated, but you can see 10,000 dots there. And I've pulled an arrow out to 1 dot. That represents 1 Christian in 10,000 people. Islam is currently the major religion for the Senegalese people. We are a church planting team. We are partnered with a local church, and our goal is to proclaim the gospel to the Wolof people. And we're doing that through building relationships, as I've shared with you already. Some of the ministries that we have, as Elizabeth already shared, we have the School for Young Women. We have a prison ministry. We do kids clubs, kind of like Awana. We have a ministry to street boys. We have health clinics and health classes. And as we've been telling you about, soon the School for Young Men. By conservative estimates by the Joshua Project, there are 4,000 groups of unreached or underreached people just like the Wolof. We're here today asking you to do your part, to share this free gift that you've been given with the people across the world. In Acts 15:9 and 11, it says, He, Jesus, did not discriminate between us and them, for he purified their hearts by faith. We believe it is through the grace of our Lord Jesus that we are saved, just as they are. God's mission is yet unfinished. The Great Commission remains and will remain until all have had the opportunity to hear and to respond to his invitation. But when will this work be done? Jesus answered that question in Matthew 24:14. It says, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." So the work of the church, your work, my work, it'll all be finished when Jesus Christ returns. Don't you want to see the end of the age of the world? I know I do. I'm excited for that. When we get to see our Maker, how can you be a part of this unfinished work? I want to share 3 practical ways that you can be involved in this unfinished work. And I want you to, as you're hearing these, to keep in mind that these are not exclusive ways. God is asking us to be part of all 3 of these at the same time. The first one is that God's people pray. Pray for the nations, that they might know the sacrifice of Jesus. Pray for the missionaries that you know. On your board out there, you've got a whole list of missionaries that you guys have a relationship. Pray for them. But also consider praying for the missionaries you don't know. Your prayers are so important to the work we're doing. And pray that the local church will feel compelled to support missions in the way they've done in the past years. Secondly, God's people give. The structure in the alliance is changing. Coming in July, you guys are going to start hearing a lot of new ways that the giving is changing the alliance. But I want you to be aware that the message is staying the same, that all gifts in all ways are welcome. We're here encouraging alliance churches to continue to give to the Great Commission Fund because we are supported by the Great Commission Fund. The Great Commission Fund keeps us on the field, and we are one of 700 workers that it keeps on the field. It provides our housing, our medical, and our education for our children. And no amount is too small. Even $5 a month helps keep us overseas. Would you consider partnering with us as an individual or as a church so that we can continue our work on the field? I also want to encourage you to find a work that you love and support it. We've highlighted 2 ministries here today, and I just want to come back to those a little bit and highlight another one. We're raising support for the Boys Vocational School. That picture there is our Boys Vocational School as it was dedicated a number of years ago. $5 a month. I'm going to keep coming back to that because it's such a small amount. You know, that 1 cup of coffee that everybody talks about. $5 a month will help pay for consumables like paper towels and school paper, things that are so important for running a mechanic school. Or maybe consider $50 a month, which would allow us to buy toolkits for our graduates, these kids that come into our school with no idea what a screwdriver even is, leave the school and they need tools so that they can go find their first job. We're also raising support to be able to show the love of Christ in our town. Again, $5 a month is all it takes. And we can put shoes on begging children in our neighborhoods that knock on our door, looking for love from their neighbors. $20 a month would allow us to meet the financial needs of those in our church. Our church is the family for these new believers. Their family is rejected when they turn away from Islam, and our church becomes the family. And as part of that church, we need to be able to help our family when they have unseen medical bills or difficult times. Please talk to us about ways that your giving can directly support our family and the work that you're doing the work that we're doing in Senegal. Elizabeth will tell you a little bit later about the sign-up sheet for our newsletter. Pick up our card. We have an email address on there. And please prayerfully consider about how you can partner with the Williams family and our team. And then finally, God's people are called to go. Acts 1:8 is like the Alliance theme verse. And from that, I kind of came up with a little mnemonic. See, I came out of the working world as an engineer, and I like these little mnemonics that help me remember things. And from Acts 1:8, we get that we are called to the here, to the near, and to the obscure. The obscure just being an obscure word for far away. We're not all called to go to Africa, but we are all called to go. Whether it be to your neighborhood right around you, to your kid's school, to your mailman, to your cashier, we're all called to go and spread the gospel. There's opportunities right here nearby to you guys. 2.5 hours away in Minneapolis is Envision Twin Cities, where there's opportunities to reach out to, I just forgot the word, refugees who are coming into Minneapolis. But I want to push you to that obscure. Maybe sitting here today, one of you is being called to serve God overseas. We also have a flyer for college students if you're interested. We're looking for, not specifically just college students, but we're looking for people to give 2 years of their life to find out what missions mean, 1 to 2 years, no commitment. We're looking for preachers and church planters, those what we call stereotypical missionaries, but we're also looking for professionals, people like my family, medical people, teachers, like we have a school teacher that teaches our children in Senegal, blue-collar workers, white-collar workers, whatever you are, God can use you both here and overseas. And I don't want to let retired couples off the hook or retired people, because some of the best people for missionaries are retired people. Would you consider using a part of your retirement to serve God? All of Jesus for all the world takes all of us. In closing, as we spend this time in missions emphasis, as you're sitting there, I wonder if God isn't asking you the question, will you join him today? He's whispering versions of these questions into each one of your minds. Will you give sacrificially? Will you do what he is asking and join him in finishing this unfinished mission? Will you be a prayer warrior? Will you minister to the locals? Will you go and serve? Let God do unfinished work in your heart. Let him stir you to be a part of his unfinished mission. We must be people who are going deeper with Jesus. Even if you're already involved, the Holy Spirit is calling you into a deeper relationship with him.
In closing, I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of things. We have a display down in the foyer. You're welcome to take a look at our things and touch and feel whatever you like down there. We've got a musical instrument and some money you can see. On the table opposite that, we have our sign-up sheet for our newsletter. Feel free to write your email address. Please write clearly. You can add your name there. We have 2 columns that you can check. One is to receive our family's newsletter specific to us and what goes on. That is sent out by Steve and I monthly, bi-monthly, something like that. There's another newsletter that's specific to the Wolof people. That's the people group that we serve. And that newsletter is written about weekly by different members of our team. So it won't be just from us, but it's usually very short, just like 1 paragraph or a couple of prayer points. And those are things just to keep triggering your attention. Maybe God is calling you today to go deeper in that area of prayer, and you want to know, how can I do that? This is a great opportunity to be able to receive that information, find out a little bit about the culture or something that's happened on our team, and then pray specifically for that each week. In addition, we have prayer cards, like Steve said. We've got our picture on there. You can hang that on your fridge or wherever you like, and our contact information is on there as well. We'd love to hear from you. Feel free to send us an email. And for those watching online, I will send a link to the church, and so you can sign up for either the Wolof prayer letter or our newsletter real easily just by clicking on that online. Thank you so much for having us this weekend. It's been a pleasure to get to know so many of you again, and we've really enjoyed spending time with you both on Friday, yesterday, and today.